if you're not doing £100,000 per employee, you're going to struggle. My name's Joe Burns. I am a co-founder and CEO of a company called Reformed IT. I think a lot of MSP businesses are born out of accidental entrepreneurship. What doesn't happen is a lack of understanding of business and numbers. And they go, no, it's my margin. That's not margin, that's markup. There's a big difference and a divide between those two. A lot of people, accidental MSP entrepreneurs, they never stop and think, what am I trying to achieve as a purpose? And what am I trying to achieve financially? And do those two things interlink with each other? If you get to a point where you have ill health, it changes perspectives completely about what people want to do. And I've seen the devastating effect of somebody not really planning and they've not thought this through about how do I build the valuation in my business. You can't turn around to a client after they've been breached and go, well, it's your fault. You picked our good package. That's why you were breached. You should have had our best package. If you'd have had our best package, we'd have protected against that. If you're going to provide a service to a client and you want to make sure that they're protected, then only do best. You're actually making your team way more efficient because they get to focus on one standardized set of products and services to deliver rather than multiple.
Welcome to this episode of the MSP Insider. I'm so excited to bring you a voice from the other side of the pond, for me at least today. And so before we kind of dive in, why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do and why the hell you do it.
I still don't know why I do it, to be honest, in the MSP industry. I think I love being in the MSP industry and the community. My name's Joe Burns. I am a co-founder and CEO of a company called Reformed IT. We're based in the East Midlands in the UK. And prior to that, I built an MSP which started in 2005 and exited that in 2016. So it was acquired in 2016. And I started Reformed in 2019 with two co-founders, basically. I also now try and do as much as I can to give back to the MSP community. I'm involved in lots of peer groups and other kind of community projects because I think that we're in such a great community and I love to share any insights and information with others.
Yeah, I love that. You almost like doubled down on your answer, in my opinion, too. I feel like I'd answer the question similarly in that I have no idea why I spent 18 years inside MSP, but it was like this sick addiction that I couldn't walk away from. I loved the pace. I loved the challenge. I loved the people. I loved the solutions. I loved having an impact. And what I didn't do is build and grow an MSP and then make the decision to go back into it again, like you did. So like if people don't believe your answer, I think the proof is in the reality that you had so much fun the first time, you decided to jump straight back in for the brain damage a second time too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I actually want to unpack that maybe a little bit once we get into the episode as well. But the way we kick off these shows is sort of like giving the prior guest who dropped all the value, the opportunity to ruin someone else's day by asking a question to open up our conversation. And so the last guest that I interviewed, or the question that comes from, was Mark Leeper of Hats AI. And his question for you was, what software, what gadget, what piece of technology, what is it? What is the one thing that you use every day that might not be super common, but that you absolutely couldn't live without?
So obviously you got me with the common piece because obviously there's a lot of tools, but I know there's a lot of MSPs that are using a lot of similar tools. I'd say one thing that not everybody is using that I find really, really valuable is a piece of software called Scribe. So for us, Scribe helps because it's a much quicker and easier way of documenting processes and documenting step-by-steps. Mm-hmm. So we love that as a tool. It means that we tend to find that we do document things, whereas people avoid it because it's too much hassle. So yeah, Scribe.
Yeah, I love that. And I've used that myself too for that very same reason. The most challenging part about documentation is like starting. It's almost like writer's block, right? You have a blank piece of paper. You don't necessarily know where to start. And the thing I like to use that for is like, I just go through the motions and it captures it along the way. And then I don't have a blank piece of paper. It may not be perfect, but it just takes me that last 20% to polish it up and send it home. So I would second that as well. All right, let's dive into some of the topics that were really agitating you, really, which is what motivated you to come on the show, and let's talk through it. So to your point earlier, where you're really active in the community, you're involved in peer groups, you're kind of all over the place in that regard, or perhaps more involved than most. And I would say by taking a peek is that you're really making waves in the MSP community with some strong opinions too. I want to really dig into like what's happening behind the scenes in MSPs in the MSP space specifically. And one of the areas that you tend to talk about a lot, especially on LinkedIn, is this really issue, but the conversation of service margin or margin in general for MSPs is one area that you've been pretty vocal. Let's start with something provocative, right? Like
Mhm.
you've recently posted that MSP owners are flying blind when it comes to their margins. Would you unpack that for me a little bit?
Yeah, I think that obviously the wider topic is just numbers generally. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of, I find it interesting, not not uncommon for MSP business owners to be running their businesses without understanding the numbers, like
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally understanding the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand why, because most of us started based on we're technicians. We
Yeah.
did a job, and we were really good at that job, and then we thought, oh, we could do this for other people and start it on our own. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think a lot of MSP businesses are born out of accidental entrepreneurship, where someone's like, I'm really good at this, let's just go and do it for myself. What doesn't happen is there's a lack of understanding of business and
Mm-hmm.
numbers and the other bits that are besides the doing of the work.
Yeah.
Then people don't pick those bits up. They don't learn those parts at the same rate they learn new tech.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it's really common that I'll talk to MSPs and I'll start asking number related questions about their business and say, everyone kind of knows what revenue they're doing. I'll say, oh, where you're at revenue, numbers of people, and how
Yeah.
many clients have you got? And then I'll delve a little bit deeper and I'll say, kind of what gross margin are you at the moment? What's your net
Mm-hmm.
margin? What's your EBITDA? And then you see people glaze over a little bit and kind of like, oh, what's what now? And then they
Yeah.
start to almost have a stab at the dark, and they'll guess and they'll say this, and then I hear the common one I hear a lot is, I'll start to unpack it and go, well, how much margin do you add, for your products? When you're selling
Mm-hmm.
products, how much margin do you add? And they go, oh, I add 30%. I'm just making stuff up, right?
Right.
I had 30%. Like, do you add 30% on top of a cost price, or is that your margin? And they
Mm.
go, no, it's my margin. It's like, so tell me how you work that out. Well, I take the cost price and I add 30%. All right, okay,
Mm-hmm.
that's not margin. That's markup. And
Yeah.
there's a big difference and a divide between those two. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really it's really important to understand what your margin, especially your gross margins, are, because without that, you're not going to understand how much you've got to spend on your overheads in the business, and then what you're going to be left with at the end of the day anyway. So, just a lack of understanding around numbers and
Mm-hmm.
margins, gross margins, net margins. I feel there's a distinct lack in our
Yeah.
community about that topic generally.
Yeah, I would completely understand. And I can just think of like any of those breakfast or lunch tables at any conference that I'm at, right? And I sit there back when I was on the MSP side, but even now I'm talking to MSPs when I'm at them. And if you ask any of those kind of characteristic traits about their business, right? Oh, what do you do? And oh, you're an MSP. Well, how big are you? Or like, what kind of company are you? And you'll normally get one of those two answers, right? It's either this top line revenue number or the number of headcount that they have
Mm-hmm.
in it. And like that's sort of the barometer of success that the industry uses is like, well, I'm 3 million, I'm 5 million, I'm 8 million or whatever, or I'm, 20, 30, 40 people. But to your point, like it doesn't really tell you anything meaningful about what kind of company they are or what kind of status they're in, or even really the health of the organization at that
Yeah.
point. Um, I know when I worked for 5 different MSPs, and uh, it seemed like, and talked to many more, but it seemed like the commonality to your point was more like the most intricate a lot of the financials got initially, where I know how much comes in and I know how much goes out, and I sort of know how much is left over at the end of every month. And as long as the checks are cashing, then we're still good. And it's just sort of like this grow at the top line and hope that at the end of each month, that number that's left over grows a little bit more and a little bit more. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's kind of your example too, but
Yeah, the some of the numbers that are basic, but that I use as a barometer for health check is top line revenue number, and then I'll tend to ask, how many people have you got? Because
Mhm.
quite easily, at least you've got two things that you can gauge a business
Mm-hmm.
on is what's your revenue figure, how many people. And then obviously in the UK, I've always said ever since starting Reform, so the second MSP and having learned the lessons from the first MSP, I
Mm-hmm.
always say you should be minimum in the UK £100,000 per employee, right? As a
Mm-hmm.
bare minimum. If you're not doing £100,000 per employee, you're going to struggle because there's not enough in it then,
Mm-hmm.
to pay the person a decent wage, to train them, the tools that they need, everything that's associated with the cost of having that employee. So like
Yeah.
you need to be basing at least £100,000. So that revenue figure and employee numbers is a great quick thing because you can almost get a quick sense of the health of the business just
Yeah.
by those numbers. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, that sounds really impressive. You're
Mm-hmm.
doing 2.5 million revenue with 10 people. That's good. That's pretty impressive. But when you
Mm-hmm.
hear a business that's doing, £1 million in revenue and they've got 15 people, you're like, oh,
Yeah.
how do you make that work? So yeah,
Yeah.
there's some basics around that, but it's not obviously the fundamentals is as we were talking about margins.
Yeah.
It's about then understanding what the margins are in the business, and in particular, obviously you mentioned it about me and service gross margin and why there's so much importance laid on that is that generally in the MSP space, our biggest chunk of revenue, or what should be our biggest chunk of revenue, is our managed service offering. That should be
Yeah.
our biggest revenue item in terms of percentage wise of the business. For a healthy MSP, you want that recurring piece, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's where you've really got to make sure that your margins on that piece, it's your biggest chunk. You want to get your margins right. And one of the things that I find is that people don't even understand the concepts of what goes into that calculation. How do we
Yeah.
work out our service gross margin, and understanding that your technical team, the wages in your technical team, they're a direct cost to you providing that service. And the
Mm-hmm.
tools that you're using, the PSA systems, the RMM systems, everything like that is a tool that you're using for that service, to deliver that service. And
Yeah.
so it's really important for people to understand that and then work out what their service gross margin is, because that's where you need to be tracking your benchmarking. I know because we're in Evolve, and so we
Mm.
see SLI numbers, best in
Sure.
class, top 25% is around about 50% service gross margin. So that's your benchmark. That's what you're aiming for. But unless you know that number, you don't know whether you're doing it right or not. So you need to
Mm.
understand that basically.
Yeah, that's great. And what I want to do is really dive deep, or like reach in and pull out some of your expertise, because you do know these things so well. And so for the MSP that's listening, and the average MSP is probably around 15 users, 15 employees, um, and and they might be in that boat where it's like, I just know my dollars in, my dollars out, and how much I might have left over. Like, what's the simplest 3-step framework we could give them to have them even just begin to wrap their arms around? Maybe it's just the margin conversation, or like the most important financial metric they can start working to understand yet this month.
Yeah, I mean, I would take it from what I think is the most important to understand is, and we're stepping back a bit from margins initially. You obviously need to understand that information. It's really
Mm-hmm.
important to understand that. But when we started Reformed, one of the things that we sat down and did as a uh, you know co-founders is we sat down and said, what do we want this business to do? What do we want? Where do we want it to go? What do we
Yeah.
want out of it personally as well? Because that's the
Mm-hmm.
other thing. A lot of people, accidental MSP entrepreneurs, they roll into it. They never stop and think, what is this for? What am I trying
Yeah.
to do? What am I trying to achieve?
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's two sides to that. What am I trying to achieve as a purpose?
Mm-hmm.
And what am I trying to achieve financially? And do those two things interlink with each other? Do they align?
Yeah.
But so for me, in terms of breaking down and understanding numbers from a high level perspective, is what do we want out of it? What does that look like to me? And
Mm-hmm.
then it's breaking it down as to, I generally go 3-year plan. Where do you want to be in 3 years? And for me, I have a
Sure.
valuation number in mind. What should this business to be worth to me?
Mm-hmm.
What's my equity stake in this business? So how do I get it to a certain valuation? Then it's understanding how do we even come up with a valuation? how's that going to work?
Mm-hmm.
And then you will end up realizing that the valuation will come based on what's the bottom line figure, what's the EBITDA figure, and from that you'll start to learn about how much value is being created in the business.
Yeah.
Now, then once you understand that and what your bottom line figure needs to be, that's when it then translates across to all your margin numbers, because then you've got to relate everything up. What can we get in revenue? How many customers do we need to get to generate that sort of revenue? What margins are we doing? So how much would we be left with, and how do we multiply that up? So this is where it all starts to fit together. And if you don't understand the basics around the numbers, you are going to be guessing. But yeah, that's how we did, and that's how I would suggest to people to start, is go, what do you want out of the business? What does the number look like? Pick 3 years away, where would you want to be? Then break that down in reverse. How do we get to that point? How many clients do we need? How much revenue is that? What margin can we expect to make on each of those clients? And so yeah, that's how I would go about it.
Yeah, and for anyone that's listening who hears that, and maybe you go cross-eyed because it's all brand new stuff, right? I just encourage you to rewind 3 minutes and just listen to the questions that Joe just listed out. Now, they were rhetorical, but use them that way. Like, treat it as a transcript, print it out on one sheet of paper, right? And ask myself, just those basic questions. And if you have question marks and blank spaces, it's not something to be embarrassed about. It's not something to be upset about. It's not something to be freaked out about. It's something to take control over, right? Lean in and go get the answers. Odds are you have an accountant, you have the right people that have at least some baseline knowledge around the answers that you want. You may not like the answer right away, but at least you're going to be aware of it. And then from there, you can take control of it and make certain decisions intentionally in the business to orient it and steer it towards the outcome that you want. I really liked how you essentially said, if I heard you correctly, like begin with the end in mind.
Yep.
Essentially. And there was, again, out of those 5 MSPs, there was 2 of the more mature ones ended up in a scenario where like it was very clear what the business was there to exist for. Meaning, I think oftentimes I see in this space where MSP owners haven't sat down and asked themselves a question. Maybe it's this question, maybe it's a flavor of it, is like, am I here to build a lifestyle business, or am I here to build a company that sustains a particular type of lifestyle for me? And like, what's the enterprise value of that? What's the end goal look like? And even just that question alone, I've seen people, really have to sit with and struggle with. And that's okay, because it's not like something you should just impulsively respond to, but like you should be asking yourself those questions so that you even know what the end is. Otherwise, maybe to your earlier point, you get to the end of like 20 years of doing MSP, but like, what do you have to show for it? There's no asset to flip. There's no, you're just kind of left with only the PTSD and the scars of doing it for that long.
Yeah. And another thing I say about that is like building valuation in the business. I talk to a lot of MSP business owners who, I'm talking about figures, valuations, and they often go, oh, I've got no intention or plan to sell the business. That's fine. That's fine. A lot of people, including me, we're in this, we love it, we enjoy it. I always say, people talk about work-life balance. If you really enjoy what you're doing as a job, like, work-life balance is easy, right? Because you're doing something you enjoy. It's not stressful. If it is stressful, things, you may want to reconsider. That's going back to that whole purpose and alignment thing. But people, business owners that I talk to in the MSP world, they love it. They're enjoying what they're doing. They go, I've got no intention of selling the business. Fine. But at some point, it's going to happen, right? At some point, you're going to have to retire from the business, and it might be that you retire from the business and you let it carry on rolling, and that's a way you're doing. And that's an exit strategy essentially. But one of the real negatives that I see that people don't really think about is, what if something happens to your health, right? If you get to a point where you have ill health, either yourself as an individual or somebody in your immediate family, it changes perspectives completely about what people want to do with their lives. And I've seen it. I've seen the devastating effect of somebody not really planning the business that put so much time, effort, sweat, and blood, sweat, and tears into, in terms of building something, and they've not thought this through about, how do I build the valuation in my business? Then they've got to a point where they've been forced to go, right, I need out, and the business has been worth a fraction of what it should be if they'd have been
Mhm.
doing things right to actually consciously build the valuation up. So yeah, I think it's really
Yeah.
important, regardless of your ideas of whether you want to sell the business in the future or not.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like the simplest way I've tried to explain it is like build yourself the option, right? You may want to keep it. You may want to like whatever the exit strategy is fine. Even no exit strategy, no exit strategy, but you should still be building it as if,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you just took on that like build as if mindset, you'll end up in a scenario where you have the option, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus you kind of left with nothing in that regard. You had touched on one thing really briefly, and if people weren't listening really closely, they may not even have caught it or understood the difference between the two. But I want to ask maybe a question around this: is what is the one number that most MSP owners are getting completely wrong as it relates to calculating their margins?
Yeah, it's a funny one. It's not one that I've delved into that much in terms of understanding how people are getting it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The common thing is obviously I find is when we're talking about things like service gross margins and stuff is people missing things out or not realizing the depth of things that they should be factoring in.
Yeah.
One of the things again, so your technical team, the running of that service team is so anything that's running that service team should go in as a cost against that. So that's important to know. One other thing, just margin related, but I think this is a higher maturity level position, is that, we do monthly management accounts. We're on top of the numbers all the time. I think again for a lot of MSPs, if they're not up to that point where they're tracking the numbers, they're understanding the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
they'll often find that they'll look at things like their gross margin, and month by month or quarter by quarter, there's a massive fluctuation in the margin, and so it makes no sense, and they
Yeah.
can't really interrogate whether it's right or not because they just don't know, and that's mainly because of accounting, really, that like
Sure.
they're buying things in one quarter, selling it in another quarter, and then they're
Mm-hmm.
not adjusting and accounting for different periods. So we see a lot
Yeah.
of that, and that's really really common in the industry, even for significantly sized MSPs that
Yeah.
still aren't getting those kind of things right. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'd say there's a few facets of numbers that people are getting wrong. But again, if it's not your strong point, then don't try and do everything. Just
Yeah.
make sure that you've got people outsourced or in your
Mm-hmm.
team that know the numbers and understand the numbers and can help you to make sense of those.
Yeah, completely agree. One of the things that I found to be really like uh, dizzying or like that we had to demystify too was the assumption of operating on like accrual based accounting, yet like behaving as though it was cash based accounting, and like this strange little gray, not even little gray area, a big gray area between trying to understand. I call it either like the whiplash or the tail,
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure out like what are these financials trying to tell me, because the story just didn't match up to reality. But it was because, to your point about like when things were hitting the books and when
Mm-hmm.
things weren't hitting the books, not that anything was done incorrectly or nefariously, it was just when you don't have the real-time intelligence, the awareness, the understanding, or like the data isn't supporting the story, then it's just confusing, and that makes what is already confusing or challenging that much more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of my experience there. And the piece that I do think people can spend some time on trying to unpack is, because I remember the first time I discovered this as well, was the difference between markup and margin as it
Yeah.
relates to the other pieces. I mean, it was right around the time I was setting up Sell for the first time, right, and the product catalog and all this stuff, and trying making these choices between how I was going to add points to a thing. And I'm like, well, what the hell? Like in my mind, margin was margin, but it's a drastically different number, especially
It
at
is. Yeah.
volume and at scale, when you think and mistake margin for markup, because it's not how it all equals out. So that's definitely a nugget that people can dig into in their own business today and have an immediate impact on, ultimately NOI or the profit at the end of the month, the end of the year,
Yeah.
if they go
Absolutely.
deeper. Let's talk through kind of transitioning from margin, because it all kind of snowballs up, as you even mentioned earlier, where there's a lot of best practices, there's a lot of ideologies, there's a lot of gurus and voices is probably the best way of saying it in the MSP space, whether it's coming from the MSPs or from the industry around it,
Mm-hmm.
about pricing, packaging, all those kinds of things. And
Mhm.
one of my favorite things to do in general, even when I was in the MSP as well, is like find the sacred cows and then slay them, right? And so one of those sacred cows in this space is the whole like good, better, best, or the what else do they call it? Like the precious metals pricing, right?
Yeah,
Gold,
got a
silver,
bronze, silver,
platinum.
gold, or
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So what is it that, or why is it maybe even that every MSP coach or most of the entities kind of offer that as the answer to the
Mhm.
problems
Yeah.
versus a different way of approaching it?
Yeah, well, I think it stems back some time anyway. And we did exactly the same in the previous MSP because of the
Mm-hmm.
same thing of sales psychology, isn't it? It's like
Mm,
you hear it all the time that if you've got a 3 tier system of a good, better, best, or a bronze, silver, gold, then the reality is nobody wants the bottom one because it's the budget one. Like
mm-hmm.
nobody wants the top one because it's the most expensive, and you can set that at a price that if somebody buys it, it's great, but if they don't, it doesn't matter because you didn't want them to buy it anyway. And then
Mm-hmm.
you've got your middle one, and it's the whole Goldilocks kind of
Yeah.
situation that the middle one's always the perfect
Right.
opportunity. And so I think the sales psychology has been around for a long time, and you'll still see it on SaaS platforms. You go onto a website and they have 3 options, and yeah, psychology, it works. It does
Right.
work. The issue I've got with it, and as I said, we did it in our previous MSP. When we started reformed. We completely changed, and we in the sense that we were like, we don't want to do that. No, going back to the earlier about working out all the numbers. So what do we
Mm-hmm.
want to do in what time scale? What does the
Mm-hmm.
revenue need to look like? What does the margin look like? What kind of customers would we need to attract to generate that sort of revenue? Then ended up around a pricing conversation because we were like, if we've got average, every time we take on a customer, if we've got to average £900 per month of revenue per customer to get us to where we need to be, we're then going, well, what can we deliver that's worth £900 as a baseline?
Mm-hmm.
What can we do that would add value where somebody would spend that kind of money?
Mm-hmm.
And then we thought about it completely differently. Instead of going, well, let's do a tiered system, we went, well, let's just make it that's the package, and everything that we think that they should have as a business from our services, we'll just put it into that package. Now, where I think this is really relevant in the MSP industry is that most of us, even though we use MSP
Mm-hmm.
as an acronym for a managed service provider, most of us have bordered on the lines of we're now MSSPs to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
almost
Yeah.
everyone, because you have to, if you're not looking after the security for your clients, then you're going to lose out to somebody that does.
Mm-hmm.
So all of us are moving across to security. Now, where I have an issue with that 3 tier pricing structure is it assumes that you're going to leave things off. So in your good package or your better package, you are missing some of your premium services that's in your best package, right? Those premium features may be a 24/7 security operations center. It may be a good MDR solution, or it might be another monitoring solution for 365. It might be other things that, do you know what? They are the difference between a data breach and not having a data breach for your customers. And so my opinion is that it shouldn't be an add-on or a bolt-on. You can't turn around to a client after they've been breached. Well, I see people that do this, but I just completely don't agree with it. You can't turn around to a client after they've been breached and they're moaning at you and saying, "Oh, we got breached," and you turn around to them and go, "Well, it's your fault. You picked our good package."
Yeah.
Like that's why you were breached. You should
Mm-hmm.
have had our best package. If you'd have had our best package, we'd have protected against that. That's not a good enough reason. Like,
Yeah.
if you're going to provide a service to a client and you want to make sure that they're protected, then only do best. Like,
Mm-hmm.
only do your best to do that. Don't give them a budget option. It just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think having made the transition from the first 11 years I was on the technical side of the house and then eventually moved on to the sales and then sales and marketing leadership side. And I found that when we tried to get cute with how we would present what we offered, meaning multiple options, right? And a menu of services, like a bring your own, build your own kind of experience, like all of it at its core really was just avoiding the fact that we sucked at selling it. right? Or we couldn't overcome the objections, or we couldn't get to the point where we were convincing enough that someone would make the decision, right? Like whatever it was, it seemed like we would just boil down that like our inability to get it done is actually what caused us to come up with these other options, or concessions, really. And to your point, I think the only disservice it really does is to both the MSP provider and the customer, because you end up in a situation that isn't ideal, and it's truly like this gambling scenario of just waiting to have that really awkward or really uncomfortable conversation of like, well, I did offer those things, I just didn't know how to tell you needed them appropriately, that you were willing to pay for them. And that's not a
Yeah.
great situation either.
Yeah, there's a couple of other points on that I'll make. Is that one, if you don't do it at all in packages, some MSPs are still selling everything as a bolt-on or an add-on service, right? So they've got a core service, and then they may have matured to a security bundle, and they sell the security bundle, but there are still plenty not even doing that, where they're just going, hey, you've got your managed IT support package, so we do your IT support. Now we'll sell you your MDR solution. We'll sell you some cyber awareness training. We'll sell you a password manager. The issue with that method as well is that your client then feels like they're constantly being sold the next thing. And so you start a base relationship with them, and then you go back to them a month later and go, oh, you need this thing. It's another £4 a user per month. Oh, now you need this thing. It's another £5 per user. And that just creates this feeling in the client that you're just constantly trying to sell them something. So then they just generally say no all of the time. And then because they say no all of the time, you're not even raising your numbers. Then you're not even getting good pricing from your suppliers, because you're not selling enough of it to make a dent in terms of cost prices and to get to a higher tier of the pricing model. So it's just not a good way. It's not a good way to go about it at all. And and the other thing with the pricing model is that if you can deliver everything under one price, so you've gone and you found all the relevant vendors for all the different security solutions, the different things that you're going to provide. The one benefit you get as a business is that you've got consistency. So every client's doing the same thing with the same base products. You haven't got various different products for every single client that your team needs to kind of learn and understand. So you're actually making your team way more efficient, because they get to focus on one standardized set of products and services to deliver rather than multiple. I mean, in our stack, we've got like 12 or 13 different solutions that we package all up into one thing. Now, so there's 13 different possible options. Sort of 13 different products. If we thought that there's maybe 10 or 15 or 20 different vendors for every one of them, just think about how that multiplies up and how complicated you're making it for your team if you've got all this variation in what they deliver. So you drive more efficiency. The other thing is a lot of MSPs end up with account managers doing white space selling all of the time, because they've got to go and keep selling these products and services to all their clients every time they add something, which is actually a massive sap on time. They might think, oh, it's the quickest way to profitability, but we're working with barely any kind of sales account management piece, because we don't need to. When a client signs up with us, they get everything. We don't need to spend hours and hours going back through every single client trying to have conversations around, selling them something else. We don't waste that time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. To the MSP owner that's listening right now, Joe, and they're either using the tiered based pricing or like an itemized menu of services like we've discussed, what is the one change that they need to make like tomorrow?
So the biggest challenge is that most people can't just switch a switch and get there, like, because they've sold it in a certain way for so long that it becomes difficult. The way that I would go about that is you have to look at your client base. You have to make a change. I think you have to change to a pricing model where everything's included. It simplifies everything. That's where you should be driving towards, in my opinion. Now, if you're driving towards that, you have to suddenly go, that's all we're going to do. That's all we're going to offer. So then you have to kind of transition your existing clients. So transitioning the existing clients means that generally, hopefully at renewals, like contract renewals and things like that, where you've got those periodically set, is that you would go and sell that new solution to your clients as they come through. But one of the things that I would do is look at the look at the client base, take it from top to bottom, what clients are the most profitable, what's your least profitable. And one of the things that we did, because a lot of people struggle to make that transition because they're scared of losing revenue. They're scared of losing clients and revenue as a result of that. So what I always tend to say is, you've probably got 10 or so clients, your bottom end, that are not really even making you any money at the moment. They're either making you no money or they're costing you. There is literally no harm in going to those bottom 10 clients that you're not making any money on and introducing the new pricing model to those, right? And it might be that some of them you're going back and you're asking for a price that's 200% increase on what it is now. So you'll also have that fear that there's no way they're going to accept that. There's no way they're going to sign at 200% of their current price. But you haven't tried is one of the things. You've not even gone for it. Some of those in that group of 10 may know full well that you are underpriced and you're over-servicing, you're underpriced. They may well know that. And you might surprise yourself by going through those bottom 10 clients and having those conversations saying, look, we've made a mistake. In order for us to do our best job for you, we need to price it like this. And this is what all of our clients are going to do. And so this is what you need to go on. And it's a take it or leave it deal. It is not a negotiation. It's a take it or leave it deal. And if they can't budget the amount that you're saying, then hand them over respectfully to another provider, right? That will make a loss on them for a period of time, and then they'll realize they've got to do the same thing as well. But ultimately, if you go and have those 10 conversations and one or two of them sign, then you go, oh, suddenly we've got a profitable client out of that when it wasn't a profitable client before. And that means you can just start going up that ladder from bottom to top and going, right, let's tackle more. And you start to fear less if clients leave because you've covered it. You've covered it with the additional revenue with the existing base. And it's just a case of churning through the clients like that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And it can be as simple as designing the system to be worked that way. And if you really think about the methodology that you put forward, is like you're actually de-risking all of the effort, right? You're going to put in the same amount of time or energy into going and having that conversation. And when you start with that bottom rung and you get some positive yeses out of it, and I know because I went through that at 2 different MSPs as well, where you will get some no's, and that's fine because you're going to move them off. But guess what? You were either not making or losing money on them anyway. So like that already comes back in as a positive margin hit to the financials. And if they do say yes, then you've doubled or tripled or 1x'd what they were paying, and now margins are in the appropriate spot, which again will have a nearly immediate effect on the financials. So you can start to see where all these pieces begin to come together. And the biggest thing I would tell to the MSP who's sitting out there like, it sounds great, but there's no way I could go raise my prices or any of that. It's like, yeah, I thought the same thing too, multiple times until we went out and did it. And I promise you'll be surprised at how many people, to your point, Joe, will be like, well, yeah, we know we've been getting a sweetheart deal for a decade, but like, what are we supposed to do? We had a business to run too. So it's not that they're like intentionally taking advantage of you. You've never gone and asked them to pay more either, right? So it's an interesting thing. It's really a psychology based false belief and limiting belief, but it's the best place to start. I would just second that as the easiest place to just go and do it.
Yeah, and price increases generally in our industry, we're awful at it. Like as an industry, is actually increasing prices. Again, number of people, because I'm so active in the community, I'll talk to some people and I'll say, when was the last time you put the prices up? And I'm not even exaggerating. Some people go, we haven't done it for 10 years. And I'm like, how on earth is that possible with all the increases you've had? Like I'm saying to them, how much have your costs gone up by over the last 4 or 5 years? And you're telling me your costs have gone up by, in some cases, 20, 30, 40%. And I'm like, and yet you've added nothing to your clients in 10 years. You're losing margin every single year religiously. Like you have to bake in the ability to go and ask for price increases. The problem I see most of the time is people are just fearful of doing it. And especially because they haven't done it in so long, it's like one of those things, they've put it off for so long. They're like, I can't do it now because it's going to be such a jump. But you have to get those things done.
Yeah, and I do agree with you too. It's almost one of those things. Like I equate it to a child who thinks they know they've done something wrong, and they're sort of just like waiting for the punishment, right? Like the time expands to the point where like the punishment grows in their head to where it's just so wild and out of control. And really, if you deduce that down, it's like the fear, but it's more like guilt or shame, right? Because you actually know you should have done the thing, in this case raise prices, but you haven't, and like you've just stacked on this guilt and shame, and like the time has elapsed, and now again you've turned it into this big scary monster. Whereas if you just walked over to the closet and turned the light on, like you'll see the monster is really not that scary, but you have to do it, and you have to be willing to do it and to like take the initial leap, and then you'll wish that you'd have done it sooner. But guess what? You can't change the past. You can only change right now, right? So some principles of that price increase process that I have used personally to be successful is, one, don't just flip the switch on anybody. Two, acknowledge that it's not their fault, it's yours, right? You as the MSP, you never raised it. So that client isn't a bad client because they're paying you too little. They're paying you too little because you never asked for them to pay you more. So like that was one psychology problem that I saw when MSPs would go attack this, is like, well, look at all these bad clients. Like, they're not bad clients. There's rarely such a thing as a bad client. There's a client with missed expectations. There's a client who's, grown not the same way you have, but that's your fault, not theirs. And so I just challenge that mindset. And then two, like, give it the right amount of time, commit to the date that it's going to happen, and then put the communication plan in place. Communicate. Communication and expectations is the core, the essence of the business we're truly in as an MSP. And so if you get those three things right, I would be willing to put some money on, the results that any MSP that just goes out and executes that one thing would get. And it'll be more positive than it is negative. There's going to be some negative, but that's in its own right positive attrition still, right? Because again, they were in the bottom rung most likely. All right, transitioning again. One other hot button, and I like that you had this because one, I was the victim of it too, and two, I've seen a proliferation of it really in the space, and that is this concept of whether it's like one size fits all or cookie cutter or any label. It's like, here's the thing, go stamp and repeat the process as it relates to marketing. So when every MSP's website pretty much says the exact same thing, uses the same language, has the same reference points and everything else, like, how does anybody win? What do you think is the biggest like marketing lie that MSPs keep falling for?
Yeah, I mean, marketing is the biggest. So when you ask any MSP what's their biggest challenge, you could say 8 out of 10, 9 times out of 10, they'll respond marketing, right? Generating new business, generating leads is the biggest challenge. And I think, again, everyone tries the same thing. One of the problems that you see is in the community. Yeah, there's lots of advice, there's lots of input. The problem I think you get sometimes is you can take somebody's word as given when they may have done something in a way that isn't the same as everyone else would do it, and so there's different ways of doing things. Like, for example, pay-per-click campaigns, right? Pay-per-click campaigns from a marketing perspective is something that a lot of people have tried and a lot of people have failed at. But it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that the way that people are trying to do it isn't working. So there's multiple ways to tackle that. And so I always say, you have to try everything. Marketing speak is A/B test kind of everything. You have to know based on real insights, real data as to whether something's working in marketing. And if you've tried it and you've iterated and it doesn't work, and it doesn't work for your particular business, that's fine. But then go and find something that does work. And obviously, from a big perspective, from a lead gen marketing perspective for MSPs are very reliant on referrals and generating referrals for their business, which is not a bad thing. Referrals are great. Referrals are a great way to get yourself in, because generally when you get a referral, the close rate is so much better than if you get a cold lead or an inbound inquiry from a Google search or something like that. So, referrals are great. So then the next piece on that was going to be like, if referrals are great, then nurture them. Encourage them, go and use your existing clients, use your contacts, actually try and encourage and incentivize for more referrals to come your way, because they are such a great way of getting business because the close rate is so much better. But for me, from a marketing and a lead gen perspective in the MSP world, there's so many different ways to do it. There's so many different facets of marketing. I generally say try everything. But try everything so that you can narrow down, niche down to the
Yeah.
things that actually work in your particular circumstances in your market. And again, almost big picture thing though, from a marketing perspective, is if I was to say one thing to anyone about how to get better at marketing, it is to understand your ideal client profile, your target market. Right? What does that look like?
Yeah.
And because so many MSPs are going at it trying to sell to everybody. So they're going, and again, it's one of them questions I ask obviously a lot of questions to MSP business owners. One of the questions I ask is, who's your target market? Who's your ideal client? And they'll go, oh, well, anyone can be an ideal client for us. And I'm like, straight away, I'm switching off going, okay, right. That doesn't help anybody. Like
Right.
you can't just say anybody is an ideal client, because then how are they supposed to self-identify that they're actually a good client for you? You've just switched everybody off. Like, so there's a lot there to unpack, but
there is.
But
There's a couple of really critical words though that people should pick up on. The last, I'll go in reverse order. Self-identification is so incredibly important. And what do we mean by self-identify? When I see the words on paper or when I hear you say them, I internally feel like, yep, that's me. I am that, right? Like that's a huge lever that I agree with you. Most MSPs miss in this space because they don't do the work that it takes to get you there. So what does that work? Well, if you don't select who is the ideal person, company, and all those details, ICP, TCP, whatever our industry likes to call it, if you don't do that, then you can't work on your messaging. And your messaging is actually the biggest asset you have to your growth. Messaging is far more important than your marketing, even because what you're saying matters a lot more than who you are saying it to. And when you combine those two, it's really where people to connect all these dots self-identify like, oh my God, I've been waiting for Joe's type of business, right? Like I've had 7 other MSPs, they all suck, but this guy, he gets it. He gets me. He understands my business. He knows exactly how to anticipate the needs. I have no idea what to look for. And just think about how far you've pre-sold that individual on the same desired future outcome, right? So like it's not even really selling at that point. It's just guiding them through their decision-making process. And it's really pretty magical when you get down to it. I think the limiting factor is there's a lot of thinking work that you have to do up front. And we tend to default to the doing work. And that was one of the things that you mentioned I wanted to call out was just because you've tried something in the past and it didn't produce the result that you desired doesn't mean that thing doesn't work. I've been just countless conversations, and I'm sure you've had more with MSPs where it's like pay-per-click's a good example. Yeah, pay-per-click doesn't work for me. It's like, well, does pay-per-click not work, or does the way in which you used pay-per-click not produce the result that you wanted? And I think as an industry, we need to do a better job of not having like such absolute beliefs along the way. Like be willing to suck a little bit, be willing to try, and really just lean into continuing to figure it out. Like continuous iterative improvement, I guess is my point.
Yeah. One further point on the target profile stuff. So that in terms of talking to people about what's your target profile, if they've got none, in fact, this applies to multiple businesses, not just the MSP community. Everyone's the same. I've talked to people at networking events that do recruitment, right? I've spoken to people that do recruitment, and I said, who do you recruit for? Like, what industries do you recruit for? And I got an answer from I remember a specific moment, someone said, any business. And I'm like, yeah, that sucks. That sucks as an answer, right? I was like, because I know obviously lots of businesses, but now I'm not associating any of them with you and recruitment. Like, whereas if you said to me, and then I start saying, if you just said to me, we recruit for manufacturers, for example, we're really good, or solicitors. If you just said that, then straight away I'd been going, oh, do you want some of my contacts? Do you want me to put you in touch with some of my manufacturing contacts or some of my solicitors contacts, right? Because I have loads of those. And just the difference in how that goes about makes it so much easier for someone to self-identify or to identify somebody that they should put you in touch with, because it might be a good referral or it might be a good recommendation. So it makes such a difference. And the other thing about sectors is, again, for us, manufacturers and solicitors are both target client sectors of ours. The other good thing and strong point on that is that when you get yourself embroiled into a sector, then you can start to really understand it better. So, for example, solicitors, we know that solicitors firms use things like case management software. That's what they call it. That's the terminology they use. They use digital dictation and foot pedals, and like, we know the different types of hardware and software that they use. So when we're talking to a solicitor's firms, we say things like, "What case management software do you use? What digital dictation software do you use?" Because they now know that we know their language and we know more about them. So,
and it shortcuts the whole thing when you can enter the conversation that's already happening in their mind, right? And the other thing I want to make sure I connect the dot on that I heard you say, because it's so important and may have been missed, is one of the reasons that we struggle to get referrals is that we don't make ourselves referable. Now, what do I mean by that? In that example where we talked about the recruiter, right? Well, okay, who do you recruit for? Any business, really. It's like, okay, you're lost in this wasteland of that's too much energy for me to figure out how to help you in the future. But instead, if you would have told me that I only recruit for neurosurgeons on the East Coast of the United States, now what's the likelihood that I'm going to run into a neurosurgeon candidate? Probably slim to none. But guess what happens when I do? I'm going to remember that Joe's the guy that does that, and you will get a highly recommended, highly referred placement into Joe so that Joe can get you placed wherever you need to be placed, because you've taken all of the workload off, like mentally or cognitively, for the person who now associates you with something to actually be able to refer you. And I think that's one of those misses, the disconnects between, well, we just help everyone do anything. It's like, okay, you'll never be the person that I say, you have a computer problem, you need to call Joe. Joe takes care of this for other customers just like you. And that's why you need to do the heavy lifting on the thinking to be able to say, just have an answer, a crystal clear answer with certainty. Awesome. So appreciate, everything so far. I want to make sure that I give you plenty of time to be as shameful as you'd like, Joe. If people like what you've had to say and they're like, man, I'd really love to either learn more, discover more, follow on, or try to have a conversation directly with you, where do they find you? And where can they get in touch?
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things. LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. So look for me on LinkedIn. Joe Burns. Company will be linked to Reformed IT. I also do a lot of consulting for other MSP business owners as well. I have got another company besides the Reformed IT business, which is my consulting kind of arm, and that's a business called MSP Blueprint. So feel free to look that up as well. But I'd love to connect with more people on LinkedIn, because that's where I'm very opinionated and share some insights and topics on a frequent basis.
Yeah, awesome. One of the things that David Powell likes to say, and I think it's relevant to what you mentioned, is that everyone seems to have an opinion, but it's the well-informed opinions that matter most. And so I love that you are opinionated, but I also love that you've got the history and the context and the backing and like the reality that allows it to be an informed opinion, even if it's disagreeable at times, right? And who knows? But I can't let you off the hook, though, before I give you the opportunity to ruin the next guest's day with a question that you want to leave behind for them. So what would that question be, Joe?
Yeah, well, let's get them thinking about if you were to go back 5 years from today and you were to give yourself one piece of advice that you now understand, what would that advice be?
Awesome. I can't wait to cue that one up and let it rip. So, Joe, thank you again for coming on this episode of MSP Insider. It's been great talking with you, and I appreciate you doing so.
No problem. Great to be on.
All right.
Thank you very much.